Representative Boyle there getting it right. In focus, Senator Marco Rubio of the great state of Florida, ranking Republican on the Senate Intelligence Committee and member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee as well. Senator, thank you so very much for moments of your time today. Antony Blinken, our Secretary of State, is on the ground right now in Israel. He's set to speak live moments from now. We will take that live. What do you want to hear from him?
Well, I think the continued messaging about how we're going to be there to support Israel in its effort. I don't think we need to be as explicit as the Israelis have been, but Hamas seeks to be, embedded in all of this is Hamas wants to be the dominant Palestinian group in the region. That's what they want. They want to be the dominant faction for Palestinians. And they think that what they have carried out, the taking of hostages, the ability to exchange them in the future for certain concessions, and frankly, the brutality that you see on television, that you've seen cheered on in some parts of the world and sadly in some parts of our country, it increased their prestige, increased support for them as the most effective anti-Israel Palestinian faction in the Middle East. And so I think it's clearly important that they be destroyed and that Israel do everything they can to destroy them. Now, this is going to be very unpleasant because Hamas hides behind civilians. They use them as shields. And don't really care about people dying. They view death in the service of their cause as a form of worship. And so it's a very disturbing situation. So we don't need to be as explicit at that per se, but we do need to make clear to Israel's enemies that the United States will continue to supply Israel what they need until that job is done. And the second message, which is important, is as this effort moves forward, we have to work very hard to tame the temptation of Iran and their proxies in the region from targeting and attacking Americans. We know who their proxies are. They can't hide behind the proxies. And I think it's important for the administration to make clear that an attack against Americans in the region by Iran or by their proxies will be considered an attack against the United States by the Iranian state, and it will meet a swift and immediate U.S. retaliatory response against Iran.
I tell you what, 6 days later, I don't see that immediate physical response. And maybe there's a whole lot going on, and I'm certain there is, that we don't know. But I mentioned this earlier in the hour. We had a president, Donald Trump, who said you kill one and he'd come for them. And I'm paraphrasing, but we got at least 25 Americans dead that we know about now on the ground at the hands of terrorists. What should the response be? What should we hear from Blinken? Because apparently, I don't know if the president will go there the way he went to Ukraine. I don't know if he'll go to Israel at this point.
Well, I think the most important thing for Israel always is that their enemies understand the U.S. is lockstep behind Israel, that there's not going to be any separation, that we're not going to be here 10 days from now saying to Israel, okay, you've done enough, you've killed enough Hamas terrorists, it's time to stand down.
Is that
That's
how
what these
it
guys
has
count
been
on.
in the past?
That's what it was in 2021. It was. And I think there's always that is what they're counting on. And again, these guys in Hamas are not sitting there saying, boy, we really got to stop this because too many civilians are dying. They don't care about any of that. In their mind is what they want to do is emerge from this being able to be viewed as more popular than the Palestinian Authority, for example, over in the West Bank. They want to be the dominant group in the region for Palestinians, and they view this as a great success. They have to be degraded. And what they're counting on is that at some point, when the images stop flowing of the atrocities they've committed, that the world will start to put pressure on Israel and that the U.S., or at least elements in our politics, will join in. And it's important that we don't do that. None of us should be happy or cheerful, I'm not, that innocent people are dying in this conflict. But it is Hamas's fault. They are the ones that are hiding like cowards in tunnels and buildings in civilian areas. Instead of frontally fighting against the IDF and soldiers, they go after teenage girls and elderly women.
You have touched on something that's so important because I'm sure you've seen it by now. It's all over social media. The former leader of Hamas has called for basically a fatwa on everybody. Everybody, just go out and do what you got to do, but definitely protest. And if you can do something on your own, which sounds like terrorism to me, then go ahead and do that too. And those words are resonating. I don't know if you've seen it in the state of Michigan and across the country, here in New York City, those protests that are going on. And if we pop up on the screen the support for Israel, it's not 100%, it's not 85%, it's 68%, 18% for Palestinians, and 7% who say they don't know. They're neither at this point. How should we respond to what we're seeing in the street? Should there be concern there? Should we harden targets? What's your take? And by Palestinians, by the way, I just want to make this clear, they are not necessarily supporting the terrorists that are also killing them on a regular basis. But this is how it's shaking out in the new Fox polling. Senator.
Right. Yeah. Well, a couple points I would make. The first is that I think clearly, I don't need to take a poll to tell you that Israel is not popular among Palestinians, whether it's in the Middle East or even here in the United States. But not every Palestinian is a supporter of Hamas. And not every Palestinian, despite their feelings about Israel, is in support of slaughtering babies and things of this nature. So it's important to say that. The second point, though, is we always should be vigilant about these threats. Look, we have a border with Mexico. We know that there are people crossing that border that hold potential passports or documents that are not real. We know that Iran and other elements have long aspired to embed inside of our country sleeper cells that they can activate in a time of conflict to use as leverage against us. So we should always be vigilant about it. I think the greatest risk, in my mind, based on everything I know, in the short to midterm, is not some orchestrated effort by a 20 or 25 person hit squad. It is that 100 people hear that message and one or two of them are inspired to carry out an attack, a lone wolf type attack. Those are very difficult to spot ahead of time and very difficult to disrupt. And we've had those things happen. We had a pilot, a Saudi military pilot, who was training alongside our soldiers in Northwest Florida, who carried out such an attack at one of our air stations. And we've seen these attacks in the past. And to me, that really poses the greatest short-term, midterm risk, is the lone wolf attack within our country and in other parts of the world. That is not to say that there aren't some more orchestrated attacks that are also a threat. But the one that I think is most immediate and most worrisome, because it's the hardest to identify and disrupt, is the lone individual who is inspired by this to take action.
Or the people who are already here. I mean, they may not be coming across those 1,900 miles of border, most of it porous enough to get people through, as we've been seeing. They're just flowing through like water.
Yeah, look, if you're willing to go out in public and celebrate and mock and laugh about the slaughter and the butchery of innocent people, innocent Jews, then that's just one step removed from saying, and by the way, I'm going to kill some Jews myself. That is very worrisome. And that's hard to identify and spot ahead of time. But that, to me, is the most immediate and prominent risk. Of course, there is always the risk of an organized effort. And that's ongoing from multiple elements.
Right.